is Nintendo going to get ports from those consoles coming up, which are due to release next year? Now, regardless if PlayStation 5 is more powerful.
Who done stepped in the game at point blank range? Who done stepped in the game at point blank range? Who done stepped in the game? Stepped in the game. Stepped in the game.
Detail as a game that is enclosed in a room or building would. So either way here, you're looking at quite a big leap in technology on all aspects that wouldn't be possible without these extremely fast SSD drives. So obviously this technology is not possible on the current hardware of the Nintendo Switch.
So this is going to be a video response to you know who. First things first, he makes the wild claim that what he's talking about is that games that are coming from PS5 could not be possible on Nintendo Switch due to the solid state drive and the speeds of that solid state drive. So this is why I mean that talking about technical terminology, using technical buzzwords, and then lumping them together to create your argument leads to it leads to misconceptions across the board. You don't understand the process, but you understand some of the verbiage and what it means and how it somewhat equates to a PC. And somehow you think that magically means that only certain things are possible because of that one component. So what he's talking about is PCIe, and that the bandwidth within PCIe 4.0, which is supposedly going to be supported within the next generation PlayStation and Xbox, is going to provide read speeds of around 4 gigabytes per second, and therefore that's going to make things impossible on the Nintendo Switch, which the read speeds for it on its flash storage is slower than that. I believe it's around 500 megabytes per second if you do a synthetic benchmark, probably. The issue is that you're saying that games aren't possible. Games are possible because all game engines to date, I mean at this point now, they're all modern game engines and they can be ported anywhere. So they're scalable. They use object-oriented programming. They have high-level shader language. So regardless of which GPU you port any of these shaders to, or any of this C# to, insert console here will be able to interpret the main code, be able to interpret the GPU shader language and the shader cache as well, and be able to display whatever render setup you want to do. Now, obviously, that means that depending on what your target is, you're going to have to decrease texture resolution or decrease any other type of objects in RAM if the RAM max is going to be filled. But the actual capability of the platform still isn't in question at that point. Games exist and run in RAM anyway, so I don't even know why he's talking about solid state drives. And RAM is anywhere between 4 to 10 times faster than SSDs could ever hope to be. Right now, what he's talking about, 4 gigabytes per second, is just barely maxing out the 4X slot on PCIe 3.0. Him talking about saying that it's impossible makes no sense because the main memory on Switch is significantly faster than any SSD could write. So all they would have to do is whatever they're trying to cache locally in the game, store it in RAM, and you got it. I don't know what he's talking about.
However, one thing to consider as well is that it's very possible that a lot of the details you see in front of you will only be loaded in your field of view. And when you start then turning around, the game world will load seamlessly so that you couldn't actually tell it wasn't there before turning. This will further dramatically increase the level of detail seen, so theoretically an open world game could have the same level of detail as a game that is enclosed in a room or building would. So either way here, you're looking at quite a big leap in technology on all aspects that wouldn't be possible without these extremely fast SSD drives.
So then he goes on to talk about things that the player can see and say SSDs help for loading things that only the player can see. Clipping of polygons and removing polygons and pixels that are out of the view from the camera. Techniques for that have existed as far back as GameCube I can remember, and probably before that. Hidden surface removal was one of the key features that the GameCube had upon launch, where if polygons were drawn for a scene, for a model for an entire scene or what have you, none of those were drawn unless the camera was actively pointing at it. So as you move throughout a scene, the only thing that you would see is what is visibly in front of the camera, what is recognized as the front of the camera. And as soon as you turn away, those polygons, those textures, and those pixels are cold. There's zero reason to worry about the bandwidth or the compression scheme that you're going to need for textures and polygons and whatnot coming into a scene, or having to load it all in RAM ahead of time. If you could consistently stream it throughout the scene, and as things are needed, they pop into RAM and then slowly disappear from the texture cache. And the shader, well, I guess you can call it a shader cache. It is an effective shader cache on GameCube. But we're talking about a 480p system from the 6th generation. That technology is well over 20 years old now, since ATI formed with Nintendo for this project as early as 1999. So why is he talking about this as if an SSD will magically make everything better? It makes no sense to me. Just program the game better in RAM, since RAM is significantly faster than SSDs. Again, this wouldn't even be an issue. So, like, all GPUs since the GameCube have been doing this. They have some form of culling that they do without any need from a disk drive at all, because it's all done in VRAM. All the setups for all the shader logic and everything that you need is done on the GPU itself. A lot of this stuff doesn't even need main memory or even talk to the CPU for any of this stuff to happen. So why he's talking about this makes no sense to me. This feature, this SSD feature, is literally just that. It's just a feature. It helps load main game code a little bit faster. Instead of being streamed from a disk, it's being streamed from a solid state drive. So that makes things a little bit faster. But the fastest part of the game code is main RAM. It's going to be main RAM or VRAM, one of the two, depending. In Xbox One, obviously, it's the ESRAM is the fastest part of that memory subsystem or that memory hierarchy. And in PS4, the only thing it has is GDDR5, and that tops out at 25 gigabytes per second, which is well over 4 times the amount, well over 5 times the amount of this supposed SSD that's supposed to be so blazing fast, or PCIe.
Also, one thing that is really interesting is that loading would also be cut drastically down to near nothing, because technically the game would just need to load the first area, and as you progress or walk through the world, the game wouldn't need to preload textures or preload anything for that matter, because if programmed correctly ahead of time, it would all be loaded as you progressed in the game world without it ever needing to be noticed as quote-unquote loading to the player beyond the first time you boot up the game. Remember, 4 gigabytes a second, guys, is amazingly fast.
4 gigabytes per second, when you think about it, is still 2 times slower than the texture read bandwidth of internally in GameCube. The 1T SRAM and EDRAM that the GameCube had back in 1999 when they first manufactured this and tested it was 7.8 gigabytes per second. Why he's bragging about a solid state drive at 4 gigabytes per second is beyond me. And it clearly shows that the individual making this video doesn't know what he's talking about. But I digress.
So obviously this technology is not possible on the current hardware of the Nintendo Switch, which leads to the question of how ports will work on this reported new, more powerful, enhanced Nintendo Switch coming, which, as I've shown with plenty of evidence in my previous videos, is pointing to an end of the fiscal year March 2020 release, basically right before next generation consoles are launched. Now, under a normal console generation lifecycle, the current Switch wouldn't be upgraded or replaced until its 5-year lifecycle was completed in 2022, as you've no doubt heard other people saying. However, even taking all the real evidence that I've shared away from the equation of the new Switch coming at the latest next year, it's looking extremely unlikely Nintendo will be waiting 3 more years to release a new Switch to get ports to next generation.
Yeah, Nintendo isn't going to be waiting 3 years, because in 3 years they'll be in 10th generation and they'll be trying to make 10th generation games. They're not going to be worried about the 9th generation ports for Switch. And those 9th generation games from the Xbox Scarlet and PlayStation 5 will easily be ported over the Switch. So you may have to deal with the same things you dealt with when Switch first launched and developers weren't ready. So you're going to have to deal with things like, hey, running the game in 480p in handheld mode, depending. It's all going to depend on how much power consumption any of these engines is going to require. So if you have something that's going to be throwing massive shaders around and whatnot, or massive amounts of pixel bandwidth, then that's going to increase the load on the CPU and the GPU, heating up the console, and therefore that means that the game itself is going to either have to run at a lower resolution, or it's going to have lower battery life while you play said game. It's not rocket science. If there's some magical thing that you think can't be done on that platform, keep in mind the only things that are advanced beyond what Nintendo Switch currently does right now is real-time ray tracing. And even the real-time ray tracing is a roundabout approximation. It isn't doing full raycast across the scene, because that would take massive CPU calculations to the size of a data center to do something like that in real time, which is why movies aren't they take months and sometimes years just to render full scenes with ray tracing. The compute hasn't gotten that fast yet. With that being the only advantage going forward, other than the obvious increases in bandwidth and whatnot, your actual picture isn't getting any better. All the same shaders and all the other same techniques and whatnot that are going to be used in next generation hardware are really going to be also rans of what's happening right now, but in 4K. Obviously, we know the Nintendo Switch isn't going to do 4K, so therefore, a lot of the load or a lot of the resource requirements won't even be there on Switch to begin with. You're talking about a 720p screen. So why make 4K assets and then try to shoehorn those on Switch? It's pretty simple.
Switch is a mobile device that is using mobile technology that's getting close to 5 years old. And in combination with that, it is quite a bit less powerful than even the Xbox One S. The Xbox One S is over 3 times as powerful as the Switch is in docked mode. Now, in previous generations, you saw the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 continue to get ports a full year into the life of the PS4, even though a lot of those games were not running very well and having a lot of performance issues. So in 2014, you had Call of Duty Advanced Warfare on last generation consoles, PS3 and Xbox 360. But in 2015, 2 years after the PS4 launched, Black Ops 3 on PS3 and 360 only had the multiplayer mode sold on the system, since they weren't able to run the single player campaign. So by then it was getting beyond obvious that it was over for those consoles. There was lots of frame rate issues, really bad performance, screen tearing on the screen, and they in turn were lowering resolutions in those games to 600p, 540p, and things like that, even on those consoles. So in terms of the PS4 and Xbox One transition to the PS5 and Xbox Scarlet, you'll see less games and less ports in general to PS4 and Xbox One in 2021, and even far less in 2022, basically close to none by that time. Now, if the Nintendo Switch was on par with the Xbox One since it launched in 2017, then I'd say Nintendo might be able to wait until holiday 2021 to release a more powerful Switch, which would be 2 years from now. But the Switch, as it is in reality, isn't hardly getting any ports from PS4 or Xbox One, the current generation consoles, as it is. So if the PS4 and Xbox One starting in 2021, right after the PS5 comes out basically, if they won't even be getting as many ports themselves as current gen consoles right now, it's extremely unlikely, unless Nintendo pays for some ports themselves again, that the Switch OG or the current Switch on the market will get any further support from AAA developers past 2020.
So now we make the leaps in logic where we try to equate different console generations together. You make the assumption that 360 and PS3 didn't get certain ports, or Black Ops 3, which is he just picked a random, well, I guess not so random, since his sponsored game that he's showing in this video is from the Call of Duty series. But since he's talking about Black Ops 3, he's saying that version of the game only had multiplayer and had issues playing the game online, of screen tearing and things of that nature. Screen tearing happens on PS4 and Xbox One right now. Screen tearing was a thing that thankfully wasn't as prevalent on Wii U, because that console itself was designed around not having screen tearing. With regards to saying that, hey, the 360 can't do this, and now saying magically that if PS5 comes out, 2 years after the PS5 comes out, less and less of the PS4 and Xbox One ports will be available, and thereby saying that, hey, well, definitely Nintendo Switch is not going to be available. Let's not play dumb here. It's never about specifications. It's never about what's weak and what isn't. Mortal Kombat, the arcade game, was ported to the Game Boy. If it's about money, if you can make money, you'll make it happen. So the excuse is really in there at that point. So maybe Xbox One wouldn't get ports anymore, but you best believe the PlayStation 4 is going to get ports for as long as they can see it as being affordable, because there's 100 million of those out there. And with 40 million plus of the Switch out here, I mean, it's already outsold the Xbox One in 2 years. They would be dumb not to port things to Switch, regardless of what you think it's going to be, or if it's going to be capable or whatever, what have you. They will put whatever type of game that fits that franchise on that platform. They're not going to ignore it if they're currently supporting it now. It prints money. And I know he tries to make a technical discussion and talk about blah, 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 this and blah, 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 that. Any of the technical discussions that talked about Wii U or Switch early on, they all had to do with money. If you start asking, hey, well, why is this game on here, blah, 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 you need to talk to Nintendo. Why would they need to talk to Nintendo? Oh, Nintendo helped publish the game. They helped pay for development on the game. And it's funny how if Nintendo cuts a check, people can magically shoehorn games and get them to magically run on said hardware. The same was true for Wii U. That, Nintendo was cutting checks and working deals, trying to figure out what's going on with EA, and EA thinking they're going to be the platform of choice with regards to internet activity. Their Origin was going to be the platform of choice on Wii U. They're like, oh, well, all these games and all these ports, and we got a version of Crysis 3 ready to run on Wii U right now. And all of a sudden, magically now, when everything started shaking with regards to, hey, Nintendo purchased, they did Miiverse on their own and said, fuck you, EA. Now all of a sudden we have individuals within EA saying the console is weak and we don't know if we can port this or that and blah, 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 blah. None of that was happening while that deal was still in place back in 2011 when EA was pimping the hell out of Wii U.
Thank you, Awada-san, and thank you, Reggie. Over the years, I've made E3 appearances with several console partners, but never before with Nintendo. What brings us together today is a breakthrough in our relationship based on a stunning breakthrough in game technology. What Nintendo's new console delivers speaks directly to the players of EA Sports and EA Games. Nintendo's new console will produce brilliant high-definition graphics and new gameplay opportunities. We look forward to seeing great EA content on this new platform. Imagine playing football with an innovative new controller that takes all that data, all of that play calling off the big screen, leaving you with a sharper, more personal, more immersive HD experience. Imagine a shooter like Battlefield with jaw-dropping graphics and smooth character animations of the Frostbite engine, brought to you on a Nintendo system, that breakthrough controller. Now imagine those games with an open online functionality that allows you to download new content, find matches, compete on leaderboards, and participate in a global community. And finally, imagine these EA games on a console with content, gameplay, and community that can be extended to mobile, social networks, as well as the web. Over the past months, we've been telling our employees and consumers that EA is undergoing a transformation. We're changing games from a thing that you buy to a place that you go. Nintendo's next console is truly transformational as well. A better platform than we've ever been offered by Nintendo. Deeper online capability, and all of it driven by an unprecedented partnership between Nintendo and Electronic Arts. Thank you. We can't wait to see EA games on this new system.
Go figure on that, right? It's just funny. It's always business. It's always business. That may not jive with what SuperMetalDave is trying to prove here, because his whole thing is Switch Pro must exist. My dude, hang that shit up. It's not happening.
So the key advantage that this new Switch will have is the extreme advancement of the read speeds of mobile memory technology. I had a discussion a few days ago with some of you guys about this on Twitter. Some were questioning that anything at all would be possible. Some said maybe Nintendo could use M.2 NVMe SSDs, which honestly could theoretically work for Nintendo since the Surface Pro X is using those. However, in terms of how thin or portable Nintendo wants these new Switch models to be, since I'm sure there'll be more than just one down the line, what Nintendo will likely be going for is eUFS 3.0 memory, which stands for Embedded Universal Flash Storage 3.0, the newest version of it. These are amazingly fast chips, and 3.0, which was recently released just a few months ago by Samsung, can process read speeds at over 2 gigabytes per second.
So now you're talking about eUFS, because you wanna say that since you found that this new technology supposedly is out there, that magically Nintendo is going to run to it. Nintendo gets partners for whoever they want to license the console with, and the first thing they focus on is price. How much is it going to cost per million or whatnot? And they negotiate that price down, and they start cutting down things as much as they can. Flash storage matters not to them with regards to read performance or write performance for that matter. Their whole goal is, can it hold shit? And can we then at that point program our game and then our RAM make up for it? Because that's how Nintendo makes games. I think SuperMetalDave forgets that Nintendo doesn't design consoles with developers in mind. They design consoles with how they develop games in mind. Nintendo Switch is probably the closest Nintendo has ever gone to giving third parties a bone, as far as saying, hey, this console is super easy to program for since it's literally a tablet or whatnot. But that's literally only a circumstance of Nintendo coming to Nvidia, who at the time obviously was their business was in rubble with regards to selling mobile technology. Tegra has not been selling well at all. So Nintendo came to them and said, hey, we can buy it to you for a song. And Nvidia's like, we'll take it because nobody else is buying this shit. So here we go. And now you got this console and it's wildly successful. And that's how that happened. Nintendo wasn't under the drawing board saying, hey, how can we make this easier for developers? That was actually part of Nvidia's contract. They made the Tegra, so they're like, hey, well, we'll make these development tools as well, and then you put your stamp on it and add whatever little things you want to it, so we can make this easier for developers other than yourself. And Nintendo's like, okay, great. I mean, that's from the Nvidia statement from when they talked about how many man hours it took to build the Nintendo Switch. That was part of the statement. We made our own SDK as well for this Tegra, so it'll be easier for games to be developed and it'll cut down on development time. So why he comes up with these kind of excuses and is talking about, oh, well, we got to add this new storage and we got to have the fastest storage out here. That isn't how Nintendo works. That isn't how they ever worked. Why do you think that's what they're going to do? The only time Nintendo has actively chased technology was 3D technology, and that's with N64. And even then, they found a way to make it the cheapest way possible. They took that same CPU and figured out a way to make it fanless. 93 megahertz, and granted, that was a high clock speed at the time, but the original SGI workstation that it was to be compared to was 133 to 200 megahertz for the CPU. And they had custom ASICs for graphics as well on top of that, which the N64 only had bits and pieces of as far as its rasterizer to do 3D graphics, the Reality Engine. all in all, the whole point about EUFS is a misnomer at best. While Nintendo may be looking at it, the cost of brand new technology and somehow being able to buy those at parts per million, that's not going to be a go. Regardless of the speed or whatnot, Nintendo isn't trying to match what Sony and Microsoft are doing. They really don't care and they really don't give a fuck. They want to know, can they make Mario with it? And that's to even assume that a Nintendo Switch is even going to be made. Nintendo starts new generations as soon as the new console is being developed. As soon as it goes off the assembly line and they sell it, they're working day one on the next platform. Switch is a home console. It's marketed as a home console. It just happens to be a hybrid and be mobile. If there are going to be any iterations of the Nintendo Switch to make it better or what have you or whatnot, it's going to be the new DS they just made with Switch Lite. So there may be evolutions of that. But as far as what the current Switch is we have right now, that's being treated as a home console, it has a successor in the works. And it's coming in 2020, 2023, or what have you. In the usual console cycle. 4 to 6 years.
So the good news is that UFS 3.0 is already being used in the OnePlus 7 Pro smartphone. And the total build cost for that phone is only $324, which of course varies per company since they were charged $70 for the Snapdragon 855, which in comparison costs Samsung less than the Galaxy S10 Plus. But the key is the cost of UFS 3.0. It's listed there as costing them just $20 for 128 gigabytes. So obviously for Nintendo, if they went with 256 to 512 gigabytes for a new Switch, they'll likely be spending between $40 to $80 on the console's
Now let me get this straight. You made this entire video about what the new storage speeds are going to be, right? You mentioned PlayStation 5, you mentioned the Xbox Scarlet, and you mentioned the fact that in 2018 you found some source talking about Nintendo developing with PCIe in mind. Then why are you talking about EUFS towards the end of this video, which doesn't use that protocol? It's a serial embedded device. Like it doesn't need that at all. It's going to be soldered directly to the board. So you started off talking about what you thought was going to be confirmed for the Switch Pro for 2018. Obviously, that didn't happen. And then you finished the video talking about EUFS, which doesn't use PCIe at all. This guy, he makes so many leaps, it doesn't make any sense. First of all, you're talking about the bandwidth itself being 4 gigabytes per second, which is, I mean, the GameCube eclipsed that with its internal bandwidth, which is why it doesn't need fast read speeds for its disk. Because once it's all already pre-staged in RAM, you don't really need it. You don't. GDDR5 is 25 gigabytes per second. If developers get off their ass and develop games in a way where you're streaming from RAM as efficiently as possible, the loads, if you will vanish as they do in the PS5 demo. The problem isn't the technology. The problem is the development process, which I kind of think Mark Cerny is trying to get at. So if they move that to that direction, then maybe ports to PC or other platforms, whatever, they'll take root, and then that will be the new development standard, and then people will have games that are a lot faster. That being said, all we're doing is going back to what happened in 480p consoles at this point. Everything sits in RAM because RAM is the fastest thing, and main memory for a lot of the other consoles, especially considering original Xbox, was dirt slow. So using the VRAM that was built into the GPUs was probably the fastest way to go, and whatever caches you had built on board. So we're talking about bandwidth for a solid state drive that is anywhere between 25 times slower than the ESRAM and the Xbox One currently, right now, with over 100 something gigabytes per second of peak bandwidth internally. And the same can be said of, we use eDRAM, which is insanely fast, anywhere between 200 to 500 gigabytes per second, depending on what you're calling at the time and what you use it for during your game, whether you use the majority of it as an L3 cache for the CPU, or you use almost all of it as a scratch pad for the GPU. You get insane read speeds that way. And that completely dwarfs anything an SSD could do. So even talking about SSDs doesn't make something next generation. Next generation is already started because Nintendo Switch is here. Generations are determined by time, not technical specs that you deem important. So Xbox Scarlet and PlayStation 5 will join Nintendo Switch in 9th generation. And within 2022-2023, Nintendo will start 10th generation. And Microsoft and Sony just need to play catch up. Sorry, Dave. But I needed to make this video because this dude he's been throwing around buzzwords for a very long time, and he clearly doesn't understand them. And if he wants to talk to me about it, we can have a conversation at any point in time. Spawncast, OJ's podcast, whoever. I don't care. You can come on mine if you dare, and we can talk about everything in detail. But clearly you're reading a script that you've prepared for, and you're reading your buzzwords, but they're not adding up. Anybody that's dealt with technology for any period of time can see through this bullshit. And I hope that by you watching this video, you're not misled as much as some of the other followers out there. This guy has a whole bunch of subscribers. So I just want to cut down on a lot of the bullshit. And hopefully he'll see this, recognize his flaws, apologize for them, and move forward. He can still make content and talk about what excites him, but pressuring people to think that this is going to be in a Nintendo Switch and talking about what makes next generation and what's not, and how games are developed and designed, that's not his forte. Do you play games to have fun or to impress other people?
Launchy rolling smash! Hitting no shortage of strength. Loosen, galop smash! This is where we prove ourselves. Why not? This'll be all the as expected. Scatter shot! I can feel the power of the heal. Go for it! Let's end this.
Blade combo, third stage. Awesome. Launch, Heaven's Smoke.
Nicely done. Breaking
Heaven's Smoke.
rolling smash. Dual spinning
Case can retreat.
rolling smash. Anchor shot. Ha! Everyone's getting anchor shot. Ha! Threat level is Let's do this.
Gotcha.
Radiant flare.
This
is where we prove ourselves.
Water play.
Sure.
Make haste.
Much of what? Anchor shot. Ha! Just give me steady. Anchor shot.
Farewell.
Hurt my friend.
Blade combo, third stage. Awesome.
Anchor shot. Shall we
Make
show
haste.
Anchor shot. Ha!
Poppy will show you her
Double
true
spinning
power.
hit. Go for it.
I believe you, but please be
No,
careful.
I'm fucked. Nah, I can keep going.
Magnificent.
Why not?
Do they really think they can stand
Here,
against our
keep it together. Anchor shot. Rolling smash. Anchor shot. Everyone's getting sacked. Rolling smash. Hit it. No.
Whirling punish
Magnificent.
Why not? No, I'm fired.
Blade combo, third stage. Awesome. You clear last couple.
Just like Rhinewood. Nicely. Rolling smash.
Double
Spinning hit. Let's give him the anchor shot. Rolling smash. Double spinning hit.
Nice. You must be more careful.
Rolling smash. Hit it. No. Everyone's getting sight.
Hearts of everyone beat as one. We're on a roll now.
Why not?
Right, success.
No way! We were awesome!
Behold, gift of Archsage.
You're all mine. Treasure acquired. Treasure acquired.
I feel with this, the future is ours.
Nice. Well done, you.